and welcome back to another episode of Foreign Correspondents. I'm Tommy Sorang with our panel of foreign journalists. Welcome to the program.
Good to be back, Onyx.
Welcome to the program. Now, in exactly 10 days, the third inter-Korean summit will be held in the truce village of Panmunjom. So when you hear that word, Panmunjom, what are some of the things that come to your mind?
Oh, of course, I think of the division between the two Koreas and the tension between North Korea and the international community. I also think about the truce that ended and the armistice that ended the Korean War. It is certainly a very symbolic place. Division between the two Koreas, the joint security area, the JSA, the DMZ, all of those sort of terms and all of that symbolism comes to mind when you mention Panmunjom.
Right, a temporary hiatus in the Korean War. What about you?
Well, I think there's really a stark contrast. I mean, you know this place from the news, and it's always kind of an alerting place. People talk about military tension in the news. And then actually when you go there, I mean, it's kind of idyllic. It's, I mean, there's also a lot of beautiful nature surrounding. So that kind of feels surreal to some degree also. Yeah, actually, it's a peaceful place to some degree if you actually go there. Yeah.
Right, I definitely agree. There's a disparity between what you hear in the news and what you experience when you actually go there. Stan?
Of course, it's a peaceful place, but its peacefulness of this place is kind of, you can tell that it doesn't last long, you know, it gives you the impression that it can be stopped in any time. When I come to DMZ, to Panmunjom, the first thing I remember are these bloody episodes that happened here, like the ex-murder and all those shootouts that have happened there.
Now, as the location for the upcoming April 27th Moon-Kim Summit, there's revived interest in Panmunjom, also known as the Joint Security Area. So this week on Foreign Correspondents, we'll take a closer look at the physically small but historically significant village. On April 6th, members of the Inter-Korean Summit Preparatory Committee gathered to discuss arrangements for the upcoming meeting. They convened at the Peace House in Panmunjom, which will host the upcoming Inter-Korean Summit.
남과 북은 양 정상들이 합의한 데 따라 2018년 남북정상회담을 2018년 4월 27일 판문점 평화의 집에서 개최하기로 하였습니다.
The Joint Security Area, or JSA in short, is recognized as a symbol of a divided nation, as well as a window of dialogue between the two Koreas. Panmunjom, which lies 62 kilometers away from Seoul and 215 kilometers from Pyongyang, is officially neutral territory that belongs to neither South nor North Korea. The Peace House and Freedom House are located south of the military demarcation line, while Panmungak and Tongilgak lie on the North Korean side. It is at the Peace House where South Korean President Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un will be meeting for the summit. Panmunjom has long served as a bitter reminder of a divided Korean Peninsula. The truce village will once again be the focus of global attention on April 27th as the world awaits the outcome of the 2018 Inter-Korean Summit. Now, Panmunjom is not only mentioned frequently in the news, it's also a popular tourist destination as one of the last vestiges of the Cold War. So when was the last time that you visited Panmunjom?
It was a year ago. So I went there for, it's not a press tour, but I went there in a group with other foreign journalists. I think it's just one of these places on Earth where you can literally feel the division of the country. Of the once united country. Besides, it's really interesting to see this stark contrast between the two Koreas.
Right. Now, in contrast to the 2000 and 2007 summits, which occurred in Pyongyang, this upcoming Moon-Kim summit will be held in Panmunjom, in the South Korean side of it, no less. Do you think there is significance to this?
Absolutely. That's the first time that a North Korean leader has crossed into South Korean territory at all since prior to the Korean War. So that holds huge significance. And I think it might be, you know, symbolic of North Korea making an extra effort in its opening up that we found signified by Kim Jong-un's New Year's address.
지금이야말로 북과 남이 과거에 얽매이지 말고 북남 관계를 개선하며 자주 통일의 돌파구를 열기 위한 결정적인 대책을 세워나갈 것을 요구하고 있습니다.
Also, you know, it has been 11 years since there's been any type of meeting of this level, any summits between the two Koreas. And Kim Jong-un hadn't even met with any foreign leaders until just a couple of weeks ago when he traveled to Beijing to meet with Xi Jinping. So there are a number of important and significant aspects to the summit, and it's going to preceding the planned summit now with U.S. President Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. So it's huge.
So continuing on from that, why do you think Kim Jong-un is more open to the idea of traveling south compared to his father?
First of all, the first two inter-Korean summits were held in Pyongyang. So probably the North Korean sides have realized that it's time to make a step forward and just to do a reciprocal visit. So that is why Kim Jong-un will be crossing the inter-Korean border. It is widely known that Kim Jong-un, he was studying in Switzerland, I guess, in Europe. So probably he has a bit more open mind than his predecessors. He knows how things work and what he should do. It could be like a public relations thing that he is good at. So he is really showing his willingness to establish peace or whatever.
Right. Fabian, do you think Panmunjom is the good place? It's an ideal place to hold these meetings compared to any other location?
I mean, we talked about the symbolism of the place. That's perfect. But I mean, let's think about the alternatives. If Moon Jae-in would go to Pyongyang, I mean, I think that would be a wrong signal. Kim Jong-un, I don't know if he would be willing to go to Seoul, but we have to also consider, I mean, Kim Jong-un is a despot. He's suppressing human rights. And when, I mean, what kind of TV images that would produce when he comes to Seoul and they would have a nice banquet and nice dinner in the Blue House. And I think the DMZ is the perfect place for that. And why he's more willing to set foot on the South Korean side, I think it's, you know, Kim Jong-un is in a very different position now than, let's say, his father during the previous summits. Kim Jong-un feels the policy or the sanction policy led by Donald Trump. I mean, economically, North Korea is very isolated. Diplomatically, they're very isolated. And I think Kim Jong-un realized that he's stuck in his way and he has to make some compromises.
Right. In your coverage of the summit, what will be your main focus aside from the obvious denuclearization agenda?
Well, I'm going to be looking at, I'm a TV person, so I'll be looking at all of the sort of visual aspects that are going on with the summit. That initial meeting is going to be huge. The visual of the two leaders meeting, Kim and Moon meeting, that's going to be a huge, that moment is going to be played on the cameras around the world, probably live. I think it's all going to be very orchestrated ahead of time. So I don't have huge expectations for tremendous sound bites. What is going to be interesting, though, for me is the visuals.
Visuals. So when you talk about the visuals and when you mentioned that the sound bites or what they say might be heavily rehearsed or orchestrated, what about the body language? Do you think that will be calculated very carefully as well?
Yes, I think it will be, but I think that there's a degree to which you can't really do that. And TV has a way to reveal, I think, the true feelings and expressions of people beyond what they say, beyond what you might read in print. And that's why I think television is really so important.
Okay, and what will be the focus of your coverage?
I mean, I'm a text journalist, so I mean, the contents is the most important, but I think those visual details, they will play a big role. For example, when they have the handshake, is the smile authentic or does it seem like a fake smile? Or just trivial things, will Kim Jong-un actually walk those couple of meters to the peace house, or will he drive in a bulletproof car? I mean, that also is revealing to some degree. And I will also have a lot of interviews like with people on the street and ask them about their opinion. And then, of course, lots of expert interviews. But as Frank already mentioned, I'm also not sure what will made public out of this summit. So, and actually what will be the results of it, yeah.
Okay, now Panmunjom has also been mentioned as one possible location for the upcoming May-June Trump-Kim summit. What are some pros and cons of hosting the Pyongyang-Washington summit in Panmunjom?
I mean, I think the con is obvious. It's a relatively small place, so I'm not sure if it will be able to host all the, people and the whole facility surrounding it. But actually, I would also agree that Panmunjom would also be the ideal place for the Trump-Kim summit. I mean, I guess, we know a lot about Trump's personality, and he could feel tempted to also visit Pyongyang, but if I would be his advisor, I would totally tell him, please don't do it, because, I mean, then you don't have much control about the TV images, and I think, North Korea could use it for their propaganda show. Yeah.
It would be a very good image to use for their propaganda. Now, in hopes of making the inter-Korean summits a regular or a yearly occurrence as opposed to a one-off event, the Moon Jae-in administration decided to name the upcoming summit the 2018 Inter-Korean Summit as opposed to the third Inter-Korean Summit. What are some things that need to take place for these talks to continue on a regular basis?
I think it's dependent on several factors that South Korea, for example, cannot control. I mean, let's say if the Trump-Kim summit doesn't work out well and the military tensions will rise again between the United States and North Korea, then I think the inter-Korean relations will eventually suffer as well. And I mean, Moon is kind of trapped in this diplomatic fine line between, not risking the alliance with the US, but also like warming up to the North. And I think that's really, I mean, it's very complicated, and some factors are maybe out of his control. Yeah.
Sure.
I agree with Fabian. I think the Moon Jae-in administration has done a tremendous job in sort of getting this far, bringing North Korea to the Olympics, securing an inter-Korean summit, laying a potential summit at the doorstep of U.S. President Donald Trump. All of that really, though the credit goes, I believe, to Moon Jae-in. But moving forward and regularizing inter-Korean summits and moving toward an agreement on North Korean denuclearization and security guarantees for Pyongyang, that's something, most of which is out of the South Korean president's control.
Now, if these talks were to occur on a regular basis, do you think Panmunjom would still serve as an adequate place for the future meetings?
Yeah, why not? I mean, if the first summit would be successful, then you do not have to invent a bicycle, right? You can just go to the same place and hold it.
Yeah, if it worked the first time, you can use it again.
Right.
Okay. Now, just as Panmunjom is a symbol of a divided Korea, the Berlin Wall once served as a symbol of a divided Germany. So Panmunjom and Berlin Wall. Let's take a look at these two symbols of division and their use as a tourist destination. Panmunjom, where the Inter-Korean Summit will be held, is neutral territory that belongs to neither of the two Koreas, and it's a place that is rich in history following the division of the Korean Peninsula. In October of 1951, at the height of the Korean War, Panmunjom became the focal point of global attention after armistice talks were held there between the United Nations, China, and North Korea. An armistice agreement was finally signed at Panmunjom on July 27, 1953. Following the end of the Korean War, Panmunjom has frequently served as a venue for talks and an important window of dialogue between the two Koreas. Thanks to its reputation as a place that is rich in history and symbolism, Panmunjom has also become a popular tourist destination. The Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ in short, was also created as a result of the armistice agreement that was struck in Panmunjom. The DMZ is also popular among foreigners as a tourist destination. Germany, like Korea, was also partitioned following World War II, and there was one place in particular that symbolized this divide between East and West. After roughly 2.5 million East Germans, including many scholars and technicians, migrated to the West Germany between 1949 and 1961, the East German government began pondering ways to halt the exodus. To stop the flow of migrants, a 40-kilometer-long concrete wall was erected in the capital of Berlin. The Berlin Wall quickly became the most widely recognized symbol of the Cold War. Following the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the communist bloc in Eastern Europe, the citizens of Berlin rose up and tore down the Berlin Wall in November of 1989. Shortly after, Germany achieved reunification in 1990, and the place where the Berlin Wall once stood became a popular tourist destination. This week on Foreign Correspondents, we sit down with our panel of journalists to talk about the various symbols of division ranging from Panmunjom to the Berlin Wall. Stan, during your time here in Korea, what was the most visceral reminder of the fact that Korea is a divided nation?
You know, previously I have worked in North Korea, and my first visit to Panmunjom was from that side. There was such a stark contrast. I mean, these tall and fancy-looking South Korean soldiers wearing sunglasses, and North Koreans that looked like more like a Soviet-style uniform, and that was the moment when I felt really the division of the two Koreas. The second time I visited Panmunjom, I was already here in South Korea, and it was not so as impressive as the first time, of course.
It wasn't as shocking.
Yeah.
What about you, Fabian?
Well, I would disagree with you. I think it's really easy living in Seoul to forget the division because, let's say, in the previous years when North Korea has conducted a nuclear missile, then, I mean, as a journalist, you're totally in this news cycle, and you think that's the most important event of the day, but then you go out, let's say, to a bar in Itaewon, have a beer, and you see like people just enjoy themselves like it's, you know, every other day.
Right.
But for me, there was actually one distinct interview that I had where I really felt it the most emotional way. You know, 2 years ago, I met an around 80-year-old man, and when he was 6 years old, the war broke out, and he lost his brother, like his the closest relative he had in the war, who then lived in the north, and he lived in the south, and he was always, for his whole life, he was trying to contact him. He built up a network of middlemen in northeast China, and you know, tried to get messages, find his brother. And 10 years ago, he actually managed, and they had a, so to say, like a family reunion. Like
where?
That was in the east of China. It was basically an illegal family reunion. Like he organized it by himself, and they met for 3 days, and you know, basically talked about all their life. And you know, he could see that, you know, he had a hard time. His brother in the north, he was really like very thin, like run down. But I mean, it was like a joyful experience. And then to say goodbye, it was really painful. And he told me that years later he found out that because of his brother crossing the border illegally, he was imprisoned, and probably is there still in a North Korean prison, or maybe died. And I mean, when he told me that he realizes in his life he will never be able to see his brother again, I mean, that's for me the division of Korea, and the pain and the tragedy.
Right. I mean, when you actually meet someone who has experienced the first generation of the separated families, and I'm sure that would become a very powerful reminder. Yeah. Germany was once a divided nation as well. So prior to the fall of the Berlin Wall, how did the East and the West interact with each other?
I mean, as time got by, it got better. I mean, there were always communication channels. For example, I mean, I'm from the West, but people in the East, and pretty much all of East Germany, except for some rural areas, they were able to receive West German television, so they could basically watch the TV. You could send letters, like mail. For example, my parents would do day trips to the East. That was also possible if you are from West Germany. If you're from East Germany, then of course it was. I mean, it was rare, but sometimes people would also get travel permits. But just really exclusive families. So there was some kind of communication, but of course it was still a tragedy. And yeah, but I think you cannot compare it to Korea, where it's much stricter. I think the division is really more severe, I would say.
Yeah, it's definitely more stark here. And what was the atmosphere like when the Berlin Wall fell? I mean, was there, among the jubilation, was there a sense of dread or anxiety over what might come next?
Well, I think it was mostly euphoria. I was 3.5 when the wall fell down, so I don't have active memories, but I still remember the first time that I went to the East. And, you know, I grew up in the very west of Berlin, and from the place where I grew up, it was just a 500-meter walk where the wall was standing, and there was we called it the dead zone, like where the wall was standing, and that was kind of a scary place. But for me as a child, you know, there was nature, there were trees, and we used it as a playground. But once you crossed the border, I still remember it felt like a different country. The houses were run down. The colors were different. The language that the people spoke, I mean, the accent was so strong that. You know, it really felt foreign, and you know, the children, they wore different clothes, they had different names even. I mean, it was, I mean, really like two countries. But for example, now, like 30 years later almost, when I meet, let's say, a colleague, like a journalist from Germany, we meet in Seoul, we would really have to talk for hours and hours until I can find out, did he grow up in the East or in the West? Yeah.
Now, in the case of Korea, it took Korea around 47 years since the division to have the first interKorean summit. What was it like for Germany?
Well, in Germany, it started in 1970. That was the first summit between the two Germanys. There was one similarity. Germany just had a more liberal government, which was more open for the idea of warming up with East Germany. And the first, I mean, I just read in the archive, like the newspaper reports about that. It was really emotional because you know, they met in East Germany in a small city, had some talks in a town hall, and it was, on the one hand, was symbolic. There were no results immediately, but for example, in East Germany there were like many citizens storming the place in front of the city hall. Even it was like forbidden by the police, but you know, they were cheering to the two leaders meeting, and there were 500 journalists covering it. And in retrospect, we know that a lot of the, you know, communication channels, economic corporations were basically a result of this seamless summit that had no results in the first place, but then opened up later.
I have a question about this, and I'm sure you know more about this than us. In South Korea, in its relations with North Korea, a lot of the sort of challenges are you know, brought upon the interKorean relations from outside countries, from China and from the United States. Was that the same thing in Germany? Was there this resistance, say, from Russia for East German to
not communicate
and for rapprochement not to take place between the two Germanys, as well as perhaps from the United States or Western Europe? What's your sort of educational, you know, perspective of that?
Yeah, I mean, at that time there was still the Soviet Union, and of course, then on the other side there was America, and yeah, the fall of the Berlin Wall would have never been possible if the Soviet Union and the US didn't, like, I mean, allow it, or like basically respected that decision. So I think, of course, it's always about geopolitics, and so the Berlin Wall kind of was made possible by the whole situation in Europe and the big regional powers.
Right. Now, are you hopeful that the interKorean summit will lead us one step closer to an eventual reunification?
I think that's, you know, something that's far off. The reunification of the Koreas is something far off, and some other, you know, several other steps need to take place first. Of course, as Fabian mentioned, we need to look at the Kim-Trump summit and what's going to happen there. We need to look at what's going to happen with North Korea's promise to discuss denuclearization and the security guarantees that the U.S. and its allies are willing to provide Pyongyang. Are we going to see a rapprochement, not just between the two Koreas, but between the U.S. and the international community in North Korea? And how committed is Kim Jong-un to guiding that rapprochement through some type of denuclearization? There is going to have to be some compromises on both sides for denuclearization, security guarantees, and a rapprochement to take place with North Korea and the U.S. and the international community. And it's not clear whether both sides are willing to make those compromises. Thinking about unification of the two Koreas, I think, is really a long-term scheme, and we might be able to see some type of federation happen on a path to unification, you know, in the coming decades.
Right, so long way away, but perhaps a step in the right direction, do you think?
Sure, definitely a step in the right direction.
Definitely, but I think there's this one contradiction. The more you talk about unification, it will also block you to actually reach it. I think it's more important to think in small steps, start with cultural exchange, start with a human exchange and economic exchange, and eventually it will happen. But I mean, unification should be the goal in the end, and if you talk too much about it, then it will actually block you from reaching it.
All right, we'll have to wrap up our discussion here, but thank you very much for joining me. Thank you.
Good to be
Thank
here.
you.
Thanks.
All right. Being a monumental symbol of a divided Korea, numerous foreign media outlets have named Panmunjom as one of the must-visit tourist attractions in the country. But with the 2018 interKorean summit being held there, it's our hope that what was once a symbol of division and war will soon become a symbol of peace. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye.